Hello, all you reinventors. This is Lesley Jane Seymour, and I'm the founder of this podcast and of CoveyClub.com, where we offer all things reinvention of any sort: reinvention, reimagining, rethinking, rebooting, repurposing, restarting, whatever it is. If you're thinking of redoing something in your life or in your career, come to Covey Club and check us out. We have all kinds of free downloads for you, guides, essays, you name it, we've got it. And of course, this podcast, if you look into the show notes, we have something for you, no matter what your interest is in reinvention or rethinking your life. Today, I'm really, really excited about Julie Satow. I found her on social media. She was talking about her new book, When Women Ran Fifth Avenue, Glamour and Power at the Dawn of American Fashion. And it's all about the women who ran the big department stores in New York. And I started out at Women's Wear Daily covering a lot of what was going on in department stores. And in my years at Vogue, I ran into Geraldine Stutz a lot. And it was just right out of my past. And I was like, these women were so incredible. They were so incredibly powerful. They were so incredibly creative. They were often not given sort of the, what do you want to call it? The due that they should have had for all the accomplishments that they had. And I was so glad to see that Julie went back into history and pulled it all together. It was a glamorous time in the world. It was a different world for women. But it was an incredible time of hope, possibility, and change. And I think you're going to just love the book and you're going to love Julie. Let me just give you quickly her bio. Julie Satow is an award-winning journalist and the author of The Plaza, a New York Times editor's choice and NPR favorite book of 2019. She's a regular contributor to the New York Times. And of course, she has her new book. So check it out and go buy the book, and you're going to totally love it. So here's Julie. Julie, I'm so excited we get to do this. You have no idea. When I read about your book, I was like, oh my God, that's my history. I started out at Women's Wear Daily, and the first thing we had to do was go meet all the women who ran all the big department stores,
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Awesome. So let's talk, because this is all about reinvention, and everybody here should know we have like 50 layers of reinvention here. So quickly, Julie, just about your own personal reinvention. Talk a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, and what kind of journalist you became.
Sure. So I'm basically a native New Yorker. I moved here since when I was 15. So I count myself a New Yorker. I started out as after college, et cetera, I basically started out as a regular business journalist. I was working in the newsrooms. I was worked for various newspapers in New York, and I then mostly in New York City. And then when I had a family, I essentially started going freelance. The industry had changed a lot. I was actually one of the first business editors of the Huffington Post back in the
Oh
early
my
days.
God. Okay,
So
we're
yeah,
all dating
way old school.
ourselves.
I think it was
Okay.
like 2009 or something. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I was, and I realized like, the industry was changing, and I got married, and then I had a kid. And so I just like wasn't working, doing normal, as you might know, being a former journalist, deadlines, all of that is really tough. So, um, I started freelancing, and from there, I wrote some pieces for the Times. I was freelancing mostly for the New York Times, and I got a book agent from that. And then I got a book deal, and I started writing books. And it was a reinvention, absolutely, of my career. For a long time, I called myself a journalist. I feel like now I mostly call myself a writer, even though I obviously am a journalist by training. I really write books, and it's a much more flexible kind of career when you're raising children. So
Of
it's
course.
yeah. And I have a
What
husband who
is
works
the
full time. So
what is
yeah.
the difference in your mind between a journalist and a writer? Because I think if you're a journalist, it's a way you approach something, right?
That's true. I had a hard time. It really feels very different, actually, the two industries. To me, like a news reporter and a reporter is a very, it's kind of a deadline driven, information driven. Whereas a writer, when you're writing these kind of books, like a big narrative nonfiction book, it's really about crafting a narrative. It's much more in the writing, character development, things that you don't necessarily, I mean, the information is critical, obviously, and unearthing new things. And I use my journalism training for that, but I feel like it's much more writerly, actually,
Yes.
than being a
Yeah.
news reporter.
Yeah. It's not just getting the facts down on paper, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's
Exactly.
making it sound beautiful and making sure that there's a story being told and all that kind of stuff.
Yes. Yes.
So let's talk about the new book and talk about what made you decide to write it. Where did the idea come from?
Yeah, so my first book was The Plaza. It's a Secret Life of America's Most Famous Hotel, and it was basically a social history of New York, told through the lens of the hotel. And it was very fun, and I loved it. But I felt like I really wanted to do something focused on people, not building. I had been a
Ah,
real estate reporter, so that was sort of my
ah,
transition book, going from covering real estate for the Times to writing a book. And now I felt like, okay, I'd done that. I really want to push myself and do something, more sophisticated, essentially, and get into the lives of people. So my agent was like, oh, what about Store Wars? Was her pitch. She wanted me
Store
to look at, like,
Wars. I
like
like it.
department stores and it was a great idea, but I was like, I really want people. So it was COVID, it was a pandemic. I was home with my kids. I just started like kind of researching the world of department stores, and it had that same nostalgia as the Plaza did, and that same kind of note to history. So I felt like a connection with it. And obviously I have memories of being a kid and going to department stores with my mom and my grandmother. So I felt like a connection to it. But then I kind of went down this rabbit hole. I found these three characters. And when I found them, I was like, oh my gosh, their lives are so amazing, and they speak to me, and they really tell the story of the 20th century and of women in work and of these department stores. So it felt like I had just found the perfect, ingredients to make a book.
And the perfect intersection in many
Yeah.
ways, right? So
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about first, so people understand that, yes, a lot of us grew up going to department stores, but that was not always a thing. And in New York, my understanding when I took an urban design course at one point when I was getting my master's, and there was a talk about how those stores were designed basically to drop women off for the
Mm.
day in a safe place where your husband didn't have to worry about you, and you spent.
Manage people, all kinds of things that was just impossible in the 1910s, the 1920s, the 1930s, times where we don't think of that happening. So I
Was
really,
that
yeah.
accidental that women ended up managing it, or was that on purpose that they put women in charge of women's stuff?
I
Because,
mean, look,
late into the 20th century, in many cases, men were running women's stuff for many, many
yes.
years.
So I should be clear. The men were in charge. And I say in the book, the men's names were on the buildings, we all heard of Bloomingdale's or Roland Macy's, but inside women ruled. So they were definitely operating within a man's world, and the men typically had the most senior positions. But you had women buyers, for instance, in the 1910s, as early as like 1906, where they were going to Paris on ships by themselves and going to the Parisian fashion shows and buying clothes and running departments with, dozens of people under them. So, but yes, men were definitely the most senior positions, which is why I focused on three women who really did rise to the absolute top levels, who became presidents of Bonwit Teller, Lord and Taylor, and Henri Bendel's. Those were the three stores. And they were just incredible women who had to go through a lot of reinvention. So, yeah.
Was it accidental or was it on purpose? Did somebody say, huh, we're selling something to these people. Maybe somebody of these people might know more than somebody who's
Yes.
not of these people, or was it an accident?
Well, the thing is, all three women have very different stories. So they
Okay.
did not come to their roles as presidents of these stores in the same way at all.
Okay.
The first woman I cover, Hortense Adlam, it was accidental. Her husband was a big Wall Street tycoon, one of the few people who made a ton of money during the Great Depression, and he owned Bonwit Teller, and it was really struggling, and it was on the cusp of bankruptcy, and he didn't want to close the store because he would have thrown thousands of people out of work in the depression. So instead of doing that, he asked his wife, who was a shopper, if she just go to the store and take a look and see what, could be done to fix the business. And within a matter of about a year or so, she was actually president of the store, and she had never had a job before. And there were various reasons why she became president. She ended up doing an incredible job in terms of turning the business around, but she eventually hated her career. She never wanted to call herself a businesswoman. She said
Oh,
that
it was nasty back
yes,
then,
she
right?
exactly. She portrayed herself as basically, oh, I'm just a hostess, like a wife who welcomes her husband's, business associates to dinner. That's what I'm doing as president of the store. Needless to say, it was a $200 million business and she had about 2,000 employees. So it's not really accurate, but that's the way she portrayed it. She felt very uncomfortable with her career, and ended up really hating it and blaming it for the breakdown of many personal tragedies that she went
Oh,
through.
really? Wow.
So yeah, it was very complicated to write about because from a modern businesswoman's perspective, or a working woman, it was hard. She's complicated. The second woman, Dorothy Shaver, started out at in 1924 at Lord and Taylor's, and by 1945 she was president of the business. And she was very ambitious. She lived with her sister her whole life. They were basically spinsters. She really portrayed herself as a male business CEO, kind of. She eschewed all femininity, so she did not have a personal life that we know of. And various things I get into in the book, but she was very like a hard driving, kind of copied the male ethos. And then the third woman was in the 1960s and 70s, and she's a more relatable character, Geraldine Stutz, who ran
Yeah, I knew her.
Bendel's. Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
she was more the modern, concept of a businesswoman. She was fabulous and fashionable, and she had love affairs, but she was also an amazing, leader. So, yeah, you knew her. Great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's one of the things. I mean, one of my very first job was Women's Wear Daily, and they threw me out there on the streets to cover whatever nobody else wanted to cover. And a
What
lot of
years?
times that
Yeah.
was 78 when I
Oh,
started.
yeah. So she was there.
And they just threw you out. And I didn't know. And there was no Google back then. They
Mm.
just sent you in and you had to figure out who these people were, and you'd had to go to the library. Or you have to have somebody sit down and say, "Who is Geraldine Stutz?" And people would be like, you'd be like, "Well, who's that? I don't know." Like, how would you know?
Yes.
That's not taught in college. And so it was, I was literally thrown in head first and had to learn.
Mm.
But I mean, all
I was too.
those,
There was no Google when
yeah.
I started either. So
Yes, right, right. I mean, it was a very different world, kids. I know you can't believe this. It's just like my kids say, "Oh, how did you pick up the phone when you didn't know who was on the other end?" It's
yes.
just like that's the way it was. You didn't
I,
know. It
I know. It's
could have
true.
been the
I was telling my
painter.
kids what 411 was for any of you
Right,
who remember
right.
that.
Oh my God, right. I forgot about that.
Exactly.
So, what do you think? Why was the opening there? And was it that the opening was there, or was it that these women decided to make an opening? What did you see it more as their force of will, or just, I mean, I interview so many people, Julie, who there's some people who just say, "Oh, it was luck. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, blah, blah, blah." I never believe in that, really. I do believe you can have some luck, but I also believe that if you have the right set of mind, you are seeing things that other people don't see, and you see the opportunities, and you have to have the guts to push it. But maybe, how do you see these women?
Absolutely. I agree with that assessment. It was definitely not luck. And it wasn't as if, oh, there's a welcome environment for women to come
Right.
in and have these senior positions. Absolutely not. Not in any of the cases. And I don't just cover those three women. I should mention I have vignettes through the book with other characters in it. Absolutely. It was determination, it was ambition, it was, they were very focused. All three women had men who helped them pave the way in mentorship roles. Hortense had her husband, even though they ended up divorcing through very dramatic story
Oh,
with an
interesting.
affair and all kinds of things. But he provided the entree for her. Um, Dorothy also had a male mentor. The president of the store, when he hired her, was actually a distant relative and was very supportive of women, and has a number of, back in the 30s and 40s, quoting, I have quotes saying essentially that, he believed that women, there was no reason, he said something like, aside from, war, there was nothing that women couldn't do that men could do, and it was the same thing with Geraldine. She had, there was a male mentor who actually, she was a fashion editor at Glamour magazine, and he owned a bunch of shoe companies. I. Miller, you may
Oh,
know.
I know her.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And so he owned I. Miller, and then he bought Bendel's, and he was like, "You're amazing, and I want you to come work for me." And so he lured her away from Glamour and brought her to I. Miller, and she worked at I. Miller, and that's when she actually hired Andy Warhol, who was just a young illustrator. She had had a sort of working relationship with him at Glamour, and anyway, she worked at I. Miller, and then when he bought Bendel's, it was really in bad shape. She was only 33. It was 1959, and he said, "I want you to run it." And, everyone poo-pooed her. Everyone looked down on her, thought it was a joke. She was just a beautiful girl. What did she know? And, she really remade that store. She
Oh,
created
yes,
the
many
whole,
times.
yes,
Yeah.
the street of shops, all of that, that she created. So I absolutely think that the men helped, they had open-minded mentors who helped them, but, without their own ambition, they never would have been, they never would have accomplished what they did.
Why do you think these particular women were ambitious? Why were they ambitious? Did
I
they
don't
want independence? Did they want money? Did they have something in their background that drove them?
Yeah, well, like I say, they're all three very different. For Hortense, I kind
Okay.
of see her as like, so my first book was about the plaza, and you may know that Trump owned the plaza. And when he owned it, Ivana came in as the basically to run the business. And I felt like the dynamic was very similar. At the time, Trump was already with Marla Maples, although it wasn't known
Oh,
at the time, and they were still married. He was still married to Ivana. And it was very much a similar dynamic where she felt like it was a way to be close to her husband. And I think that that was a big motivation for Hortense as well. It was kind of a similar scenario. For Dorothy, and I should say that all the women came from very small towns that were like, I mean, Hortense came from a pioneer town in Utah. Her parents were early converts to the Mormon religion. So she was like growing her own food and making her own clothes growing up, And Dorothy came from Mena, Arkansas, which is like, I mean,
wow. I didn't
very
realize
far.
they were Heartland. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes, yes. So she came from Arkansas. She arrived in 1919 to New York City with her sister. This is before women even had the right to vote. They came by themselves. They had no money. They had a suitcase between them, and so very, very determined. They started a doll business. Elsie, her sister, was an artist, and she created these dolls. And Dorothy had this really amazing business mind, and she sold them, and they became this huge best-selling doll company, which is eventually how she ended up at Lord and Taylor through that connection. And Geraldine, came from outside Chicago. She had a very traditional Catholic upbringing. She went to Catholic school all her life. Definitely not, she loved fashion, but there was definitely nothing in her upbringing that said you're going to be, this huge, pioneer of the American fashion industry. So I don't know. I mean, I think it was like self-determination, we all do it. I mean, I have to say, writing a book, it's like you're taking a leap of faith. Who knows if anyone will ever read it, right? You have to believe in yourself. You have to be somewhat ambitious and driven. So
Right.
I think I felt a lot of connection to these women. I felt like it was so amazing writing it because I felt like I was part of this continuum. We all know about like the women's lib and in like 1960s and 70s and all of that, but I didn't realize like as far back as the 1920s women were doing this stuff. So it was so inspiring.
And I mean, do you see a thread through where we are now? Because the department stores are obviously in decline. So did you follow it further out? Did
So
society change so much that it was no longer necessary because there was a big social thing about it, right? In the
Yes,
beginning.
absolutely. I purposely ended the narrative in the 1980s when Geraldine left Bendel's and Les Wexner of the Limited bought it because I felt like that was kind of a perfect ending. It was the beginning of the end of the department store. So I did not get super into it in the book, but I did have an afterword, and I've thought about it since then. I mean, I feel like yes, department stores were these cultural touch points, whether you're on Main Street or in on Fifth Avenue. You remember going to, I don't know, Kaufman's in Pittsburgh is where my family
Right,
used
right,
to shop, or wherever it was, where these cultural touch points. We have lost that, in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it's much more democratic. I mean, if you want to start a t-shirt business, if your kid wants to start a t-shirt business, he can open up an Instagram account and start selling it directly to consumers. That kind of
right,
easy access wasn't there before. So I don't know.
right. Yeah. I just wonder about it was all about social cohesion then as well. When we talk about some of the ills of our current society where everything's so split up and, you know, you could go spend a whole day at a
Yes.
department store.
And it
You
was
could go there for entertainment and with your friends and to meet people, right? It was a community, no?
Absolutely. And there were many price points. I mean, you could go and buy $10 packs of underwear, but you could also go buy a mink coat. It wasn't all one price point. Now the stores tend to be really bifurcated, like very high end or discount stores because they're trying to figure out, those ones that we always knew that were sort of middle class and everyone could shop in have disappeared. So I agree. There's a real loss of that. I mean, some people say that malls are coming back a little bit. I don't know. But yes, that kind of idea where you go to one place and you can have all these things, you can meet your friends and have lunch and get your hair done and go shopping is sort of, now we're all online, it's virtual, it's much more isolating. So it is a sad thing.
Did those ladies then pull up women behind them? What happened behind them?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, definitely there was, armies of women who had these big jobs aside from the three that I focus on, whether they're buyers or saleswomen or whatever. Um, I think that they did mentor. Geraldine was amazing for that. I interviewed, so like the other two women obviously are from earlier eras, and I had to do a lot of like research, more like archival research. But with Geraldine, because she's a more recent woman, I was able to do like just regular reporting, and I interviewed tons of women who worked for her and men.
Ah,
And the picture that was painted was that it was the most special place to work, and she was such a special boss, and she really once she hired you, she felt like you had whatever the it factor was to be, at Bendel's. She just let you go. You could be 22 and running a department, and she would just let you have freedom to do that. So she was really like, she was one of those very special bosses that I did not interview a single person who wasn't like, that was the best job I ever had.
wow. That was an era, I have to say, that was when I was at Vogue. And there was a lot of that. There was a sense of, and I'm sure, and I remember Geraldine being part of it, there was a sense that kind of once you were in the door of these places, you were kind of vetted. And, my bosses at Vogue, they'd all been there for 30 years, 35 years. And you didn't leave. I mean, I was sure I
Mm.
was going to die a Vogue girl because that's what you did, right? That was it. And then, of course, came the 80s and people, downsizing and people gobbling up different corporations and all of that contract with their workers got broken. But yes, I know that feeling and I understand that that was a
Yeah.
very unique, I don't know if that still exists today. Maybe in the tech world. I don't know. I have no idea, but
Yeah, I agree. It did seem like someone described it as like Camelot. It was kind of just
Yes.
magical moment, where it was all this creativity and all these young
Yes.
people doing interesting things. And it
Yes.
was yeah. And I agree. I think it's I don't know. We're not of the younger generation, so I'm not sure what,
Right.
I
Right.
think it's a different world now.
So what do
But
you think we can learn from these ladies when I mean, they had incredible style, they had incredible ambition, they had incredible impact on the world. What other kind of impact do you think they had besides being sort of trailblazers in the work world? How did I mean, of course, women are always expected to set style and all that stuff. Did they do that?
yes, yes. I mean, I should say, like Dorothy, we didn't talk about it, but I mean, she really helped establish, along with actually Vogue, the American fashion industry. Before Dorothy, she was the first person to name American designers. Before that,
Oh,
there was no advertise. There was basically Hattie Carnegie, and that was
oh
all
yeah.
in terms of American designers. And it was really under her that Lord and Taylor started advertising the actual names of these designers who before were, no one knew. Claire McCardle, like these
Blair
really, yes,
McCardle.
yes,
Yes.
and that was really because of Dorothy. And then, during the World War II in the 40s, Paris was occupied by the Nazis, and it was a real opening for American fashion. And Dorothy, Lord and Taylor was a huge driver of this. They created an American design, the American look was basically a Dorothy Shaver thing. So, they had all kinds of, and Geraldine is largely responsible for pret-a-porter or ready to wear in industry and stuff like that. So they all had really important contributions to the fashion industry. But in terms of like personal stuff, I mean, they each had such different fates with work and with their personal life and with how they became career women. I think it's very instructive for women to see that, because they were each kind of their era and had to deal with those things. And like I mentioned, a continuum, I really feel like we are part of this continuum. And to understand the history and what the women went through in the in generations that are much earlier than ours is so inspiring and instructive. And I just felt like this sisterhood,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Mm-hmm.
really, even my husband, when he read the manuscript, was, he has a company with lots of women, and he's like, wow, I see it so differently now. I see the journey, I see the challenges. And I think that can only help all of us to understand.
Yeah. What kind of reinventions did those women have to go through personally?
So Hortense, was a stay-at-home mom. Like she had never had a job. And then all of a sudden she's this, businesswoman who's being interviewed in the New York Times. So she really went through this, dramatic transformation quite quickly, which I mentioned she was very uncomfortable with. Dorothy, she was named America's #1 career woman by Life magazine. So
Number
she
one
actually,
career woman,
yeah,
because there
that
weren't
that was
any. There
that
weren't
was
any. You could be. There were only 10.
so like,
Okay. Oh my
and
God.
she had the
Okay.
highest published salary ever that we know of for a woman, for a businesswoman. She earned like the equivalent of about $1.5 million today. So that was like a big deal. So, she had to kind of like, there was no one like her, so she reinvented what it was to be. And you should hear some of the quotes I have of like the sexist things people said about her is just unbelievable in today's world. And Geraldine, I think, she kind of created what it was to be kind of a fashion, businesswoman. I think
Yes.
there was,
Yes.
what I mean? She was kind of her own, era. I don't know. There wasn't many comparisons. So I think they each reinvented themselves or kind of created the first of their kind in some ways.
And what do you think that readers will walk away with besides getting to know these women? What's the ultimate sort of thing that they take away from learning about these three women and
I
more?
mean, I think that there was this whole world, the department store, it's not just these women, as I mentioned, it is this whole world of things. I mean, I talk about the first Black-owned department store and these women in Richmond, Virginia, Black women. It's the seat of the Confederacy, and it's just after the Civil War, and they opened a department store.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
What was
amazing
it called?
thing.
What was it? Is it still
Um,
around?
It was the St. Luke's Emporium. It is not
Oh,
around.
wow.
What happened was
Okay.
all the white retailers banded together and basically boycotted it and forced it out of business.
Oh, my
Not a
goodness.
surprise. So it lasted for about 6 years. But there was this whole world of department stores and what they meant for women and what they did for the fashion industry and for women and just for our world. So I hope
Right.
that people come away with, this whole new universe they didn't know about. So
It's awesome. And so, Julie, where can people find you and where can they find the book?
yeah, juliesatow.com, my website. I'm at Julie Satow in all my socials. And my book is available, of course, on Amazon, hopefully your local bookstore, wherever books are sold. I'm on tour right now, so please come and see me. I'd love it. I'd love to sign your book or meet you, send me a message. I always answer them. So I love to hear
Come
from
to
you.
New Orleans. Come
Yes, I'd
for
love
the,
to. I'd
yeah.
I'd absolutely love it. I'm actually
There's,
coming there for a research trip for another project. So I will email you.
you have to. You have to if you're doing
Yeah.
more research. Yes, absolutely.
Great.
I owe you a lunch. Julie, wonderful to meet you and thank you for making the time.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Julie and me and reminiscing about the good old days in New York and the whole fashion business when it started and the power of women and what they were doing. And I hope that if you enjoyed this, you will follow the podcast. I hope also that you will share the podcast with anybody you know who is trying to reimagine their life, restart, rethink. That's how we get out there. If you give us a review, that's helpful also. It brings us to the front, and then people can find us who need us. And if you need more help with your reinvention, mosey on over to the CoveyClub.com. We have, I'm telling you, hundreds of hours of stuff to get you started on whatever you're stuck with. What if you're stuck, if you're sort of drifting, we can get you out of that. And then what's even better, come join the Covey Club. We are a group of women who help each other actually move the car, move it out of neutral and into drive. And we now have, check out our Covey Club Marketplace. I'm really proud of that, where people sign up for the Marketplace subscription or services or your products through the whole Covey Club system to women like me who need the help. And guess what? Covey Club women hire each other. When we are starting our businesses, when we are writing books, we support each other, we hire each other. It's a great place for you to be if you're trying to reach women like us. Plus, you get 100 other great things about being part of Covey Club. So check us out, and I will see you next time.